BLUELOCK's U20 World Cup is right around the corner, and since the Neo Egoist League ended, we got our top 23 players for the Japan U20 team. But one huge player is still missing. Of course, Japan's prodigy, Itoshi Sae, is still a big mystery. As one of the best players from Japan, but also someone who's constantly rejected it in the past, will he end up returning to Japan and joining the U20 team alongside BLUELOCK? Or will he end up playing against BLUELOCK once again as the final obstacle in Japan's victory? I want to answer all those questions and going over popular theories, ideas, and what I think will personally happen. We will find the answer to this long-awaited question: will Itoshi Sae play for the Japan U20? So let's get into it. So first, we have to go over both sides, starting with Itoshi Sae will play for the Japan U20. Now, I'm being honest, there is very strong arguments for both opinions, whether you think he is playing or isn't playing. But for Itoshi Sae playing for the U20 Japan team, it's mainly revolved around a few things. The first thing is that he is literally Japanese, therefore he has to play for Japan. As obvious as this is a grass is green opinion, it's pretty valid why Itoshi Sae can't play for another country. The first time we see him in the manga is literally him renewing his Japanese passport. This is also when he doesn't acknowledge Japan. Pre-glow up Sae, you get the deal. So by default, a lot of people think he is just region locked to Japan. However, it is BLUELOCK, it is a shonen manga after all. It doesn't have to faithfully follow the real-life World Cup rules regarding citizenship and all of that. They can easily just make Sae play for Spain, the country he's currently playing football in right now, and just call it a day. They don't have to follow real-life rules. I think BLUELOCK has been sort of accurate when following real-life rules, so this could be a valid argument as to why he joins the Japan team. It could literally be the only country he could represent. And since Sae also didn't participate in the NEL, he isn't part of that top 23 team. So if he ends up joining, he'll have to replace one of the top 23 players, which I think is smart. Any sane person would easily take Itoshi Sae over someone like Fukakugen or Kyoryugen. It just kind of feels like they're screwing over those players just to include Sae though. However you feel about them making it, they did it fair and square by playing in the games. Like, even though I think Fukaku got a charity salary, I don't know, Mr. Beast probably gave it to him, he still ended up making the top 23. So if Sae plays for Japan and replaces one of the top 23, it just feels like it cheapens it or screws over those players, which is why a lot of people are also thinking that the World Cup roster will increase to 26. This way, Itoshi Sae will be included in the Japan U20 team without having to replace someone that actually got the spot legitimately. Again, any sane person would have Sae on their team. New Gen 11, best midfielder we've seen, but it doesn't change the fact that he didn't play in the NEL like the others. So instead, if the roster opened up to 26, he could just get invited without having to replace someone. I also think Ego would just reach out to him because, again, Japanese New Gen 11, Sae Glaze, you guys get the idea. A lot of people are thinking that Barou, the chairman of the Japanese Football Union, suggested to increase the World Cup roster to 26. The dialogue is him talking to Ray Dark, asking him to take advantage of the immense popularity BLUELOCK TV has generated. And Ray Dark responds by saying if it increases our revenue, then they will consider it. Ray Dark is also the head of the whole thing, so he's very much in a position to make a change like that. Obviously, during the U20, Itoshi Sae returning and playing for Japan was a big deal. People came just to see Itoshi Sae. He would 100% increase their revenue. So if a star player like Itoshi Sae ended up playing for Japan again alongside BLUELOCK, it definitely fits the context of what Barou and Ray Dark were talking about. It's a very strong theory. This quite literally follows a real-life football as well, increasing from 23 to 26 players. And if they do this, they can bring in 2 more Japanese players. Obviously, Nagi fans would want Nagi to come back. I think there is a very interesting amount of players you can have here. Maybe Igaguri somehow makes it through again. However, eliminated does mean eliminated, so I'm not sure how any of that will exactly work. There is also an argument that Barou and Ray Dark were basically talking about bringing the World Cup to Japan this year, simply because of how BLUELOCK TV has been blowing up. So they might not have even been talking about increasing the World Cup roster. Regardless, that is a really popular theory, but another very strong point for why Sae will play is Kaneshiro said Itoshi Sae will play alongside Isagi. Now, this can mean a lot of things, but the most obvious in-our-face answers is the U20 World Cup. So by Sae association, everyone just thinks Sae will play with Isagi and team up there. Because if he doesn't join here and team up with Isagi in the U20 World Cup, that means it's either a completely different arc or the actual World Cup. So that means it would be a few years until we see that team up, which is a little unrealistic and it makes no sense why Kaneshiro would hint towards something in the future right now recently. However, it could mean exactly that, and he's just setting up the future of the manga. BLUELOCK seems like it's going to be a very long manga, so having him play with Isagi but just in a different, way later arc isn't too bad. Again, if Sae does play with Isagi or just BLUELOCK in general, you have to go through what I said earlier. Either he takes someone's top 23 spot, or the World Cup roster has to increase to 26. That is some good evidence though. Like Kaneshiro literally said it, the author, but it's missing a pretty good amount of context. We just don't know if it's going to happen in the U20 World Cup or later in the manga. The last piece of evidence for the Itoshi Sae will play for the U20 Japan side is Itoshi Sae acknowledged Japan at the end of the BLUELOCK versus U20 match. This is obviously one of his driving factors for why he doesn't play for Japan, so with him acknowledging that Japan can still change, maybe he'll turn and play for Japan again. Having one of the best players from Japan playing for Japan, it just makes sense, right? But now we dive into the theory that Itoshi Sae won't play for Japan in the U20 World Cup. Obviously, this goes against all the evidence and everything we said before. There is a lot of strong arguments for the side as well. The biggest one is the fact that he didn't play in the Neo Egoist League. I did go over this before many times, but if he did end up joining, he would be kicking someone out of the top 23, which is a pretty major thing and shouldn't be disregarded. In my opinion, I think this would be a bad decision writing-wise. Like, they all grinded for their spots, right? Even though we got some useless characters and Itoshi Sae is arguably the best Japanese player, it still feels cheap to include him like this. Another thing is that Rin hasn't proved himself against Sae. I think this is a huge plot point that can't really be completed if Sae just joins the U20 Japan team. Rin and Sae's rivalry is one of the biggest rivalries in the series, and last time we saw them, Rin literally had veins on his face. Bro was fuming. So if another matchup doesn't happen, it kind of doesn't fit with how Rin destroys things and Sae acknowledging his brother because he surpassed him. So if Sae doesn't join Japan, you can do a lot more for the narrative. Rin can actually rematch against him and prove himself like that instead of just playing with him, and it would be way more satisfying rather than just getting straight into a forgiveness phase where they're playing together. Again, last time we saw them, Rin had a bone to pick. The last evidence for the side before we get into what I personally think is the most obvious one. Japan has already picked their 23 players and are sticking with this team. I mean, obviously, this might not be your best team, but they proved themselves. You're not including Sae or Nagi, and instead having Nanase, Kiora, Fukaku, but they won their spots. They're all already chosen. I won't lie though, it is kind of a low IQ move to not include them. Like, Sae is one of the best Japanese players. You can have Nagi sit on the bench and train him until he gets good, but it is fair because the top 23 did prove themselves in the NEL. Alright, now that we went through both sides, it's finally time to say what I personally think will happen, what y'all been waiting for. And I'm gonna be honest, I can kind of see both happening, him not playing for Japan or playing for Japan. There is strong evidence on both sides. However, I want him not to play for Japan. In my opinion, I think this would be the best option because I feel like BLUELOCK is already strong as is. Including Sae would just make them stupidly overpowered. Especially after the Neo Egoist League, Sae would 100% be good for Japan, but they don't need him as much because they're all pretty solid now. You also haven't closed that plot line with Rin, and if they don't have a matchup and instead just go into a forgiveness phase, that would be way less satisfying. Like Rin surpassing him and finally getting acknowledged by Sae, which is what Rin wants, by the way, and was proven at the end of the U20. That would be way better than him just all of a sudden playing with him. I do agree that Sae being one of the best players from Japan and the fact that he's way more open to it after BLUELOCK, it's a dumb move not to include him. But if you're removing another player just to include Sae, it really does cheapen it. Like, imagine Nanase's dreams just gets crushed and they replace him with Sae. Yeah, everyone else would be a happy chap, but Nanase and his fans would all be sad. So unless they open the roster up to 26, I don't really see that happening. And going back to how BLUELOCK is already super strong, I mean, they're literally at the Neo Egoist League level going against U20 players and making them look like fodder. Besides Kaiser, Lorenzo, Charles, and maybe even Augie, the rest we could literally care less about. They all did nothing in the matches. On the other side, Japan and BLUELOCK are just stacked with so many different options and characters. Instead, I think having Sae as an opponent in the U20 would make it more believable that they're struggling. We can also answer the question, if Sae tried 100% against BLUELOCK, would they still win? Obviously now BLUELOCK is better. Sae didn't really try until the end for the U20, so if he ends up going against Japan again, he will 100% be trying since the start. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some goals coming from him, insane plays, and just BLUELOCK struggling against him. What I personally want is for Sae to play for a different country if he is not playing for Japan, something like Spain. I know it may be a little unrealistic just because of how citizenship can work, but it's BLUELOCK, they can just make it happen and call it plot. This way he stands as a final obstacle. We get Rin versus Sae, Japan versus Sae, and if they end up winning, Sae can finally acknowledge Japan as a country he can play for, which sets him up going back to Japan, possibly for future arcs. I think it just ties up everything nicely in a bow rather than having him just return out of nowhere. Regardless of what they choose, I'm excited to see what they decide to do with Sae. I think he is a super interesting character where I'll be happy with either choice. If they do decide to bring him on, we'll see him have his team up with Isagi and Rin, and BLUELOCK will be super strong going into the U20 World Cup, and if they decide to make him an opponent, his rematch against BLUELOCK will be insane. Let me know whether you think Sae will play or not play for the Japan U20, your reasons why, if you agree or disagree with me, and while you're down there, you might as well hit the subscribe button for everything BLUELOCK. Anyways, if you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it as always, and I'll see y'all in the next one.